Well, welcome everyone. We're super excited to have you all with us today. I'm coming in live from Rome at the UN Food Systems Summit pre-summit. And it's really great to have such a great panel online and in person on this, this affiliate session that we are running today. And so it's super exciting to be able to dive in and to really be able to talk about smallholder farmers and to talk about accelerating progress towards good food for all and exploring this new consensus for smallholder farmers. And we really want to have this as a conversation. We want to understand what you think, and so we're going to be doing a number of polls. We're going to have a couple of mentees, which I'll explain to you in a minute, to hear your thoughts and your words. And we also would encourage you to use the chat function to introduce yourself, where you're dialing in from, to let us know if you have questions as well. Some of the speakers will be going into the chat and being able to also answer some of those questions. So just to give a quick bit of introduction to this topic. So the 2021 SOFI report came out just a couple of weeks ago, and hunger is on the rise again. COVID has really compounded the challenge around hunger, and we are off track to end hunger by 2030. And at the front lines of this are smallholder farmers. Smallholder farmers are at the front lines of the climate change and also the COVID crisis. And tragically, smallholders and rural households continue to be the most food insecure and also seeing high levels of malnourishment. And this perpetuates a vicious cycle of poverty, inequality across generations. With the Food Systems Summit, there's an opportunity to really begin to build a new consensus around smallholder farmers that puts them at the center of food systems and transformation. And it helps to think about how we can improve incomes, productivity, health, and well-being, and also contribute to agricultural sustainability. So today we're joined by experts across sectors and stakeholders, especially from farmer organizations, but also many others, to discuss what this new consensus would look like, what should be in it, how to build it, and how to leverage the unique moment we find ourselves in this year, as the world is preparing to build back better with three crucial global summits. So we have the Food Systems Summit that we're at the pre-summit now, the Climate COP, and the Nutrition for Growth is happening. And so we're going to just start off the conversation with a question for each of our panelists. And then if time allows, we really would love to engage in a conversation around a few questions that we would love the audience to also weigh in around. And we'll put these in the chat and we'll ask you to share your ideas. And these polls that we're also running, we're really keen to hear from you. So these conversations I always find are better if we can be typing and watching and listening and really engaging. And we can't all be together. And so we need to engage in the best way we can. So I'm going to start with Karen Smaller, who is the Director of Agriculture, Trade and Investment for the Economic Law and Policy Program at IISD, the International Institute for Sustainable Development, IISD. We like our acronyms, don't we? And sometimes you forget the actual name. It's like we get so good at acronyms. Karen, you've played an instrumental key role in building the evidence base that provides a roadmap for what's needed to double smallholder productivity and livelihoods and to end hunger. Can you give us a brief overview of the Series 2030 report, and how do you see it contributing to building policy consensus? Over to you.
Great, thanks, Paul, and thanks for, we're really glad to be co-organizing this event with you. So Series 2030, as Paul mentioned, was a research project with IFPRI and Cornell University to look at how we could accelerate progress towards achieving SDG 2 by 2030. And as Paul mentioned, we focused on hunger, ending it, doubling smallholder incomes and productivity, and protecting the climate. So being able to do those two things whilst maintaining greenhouse gas emissions in agriculture to the targets set in the Paris Climate Agreement. The project was published last year in October, but because our vision was to achieve SDG 2 by 2030, we actually had in our results projections for how bad hunger would get this year or last year. And so actually our projections that we used are quite similar to what we saw being released in the SOFI report a few weeks ago. And our project included 100 million more hungry people to be covered by what I'm going to present to you is what we found. So I think this is really important. Paul, you started with the reference to SOFI. I think this hunger tsunami has now landed on us. Like, we have to respond. And the results from this Ceres 2030 project, the roadmap, provides us that response. And it takes into account at least an additional 100 million people who were affected by hunger last year. The roadmap that is Ceres 2030 confirms what the food and ag community, or the agricultural development community, has known and has been working on for many years. So a lot of the recommendations we came out with, it was a sort of, the light shone on for a lot of the people in this community, where it confirmed things that people have been working on for decades. So why was it new, or why has it, and I think for me, what I think it's done that's helped it give us this roadmap is pull all the knowledge from our community into a single roadmap and apply a standard of evidence that I don't think we have been successful in our community of achieving to date. So the fact that we were able to work with a science journal like Nature to publish our findings has given us a level of academic rigor and scientific standard that we don't often see in our community. And the fact that we were able to work with the best modelers in the world coming out of IFPRI, I think has been able to then put this evidence with an economic model to give concrete costs to policymakers about what they need to spend and how they need to spend it. And I think this is the unifying effect of the Ceres 2030 roadmap. This holistic roadmap that brings out the best of what we all know and do together in a scientific-based, policy-relevant way. And I really hope, or we as the organizations who did this project together, really hope that this will be a unifying force for the organizations here, for our Rome-based agencies, FAO, IFAD, the WFP, for the CGIAR, for the World Bank, the African Development Bank, GAFSP, for civil society organizations working on hunger, smallholders, and climate change, and most importantly, for farmers organizations. So I'm really thrilled that we have farmers organizations on the panel here, because I think our first recommendation was the need to enable participation in farmers organizations and give these farmers organizations a voice. So many of you have probably seen the results of our study, but just to let you know the scale of research we looked at. So we scanned 500,000 articles, so 500,000 articles from the past 20 years of agricultural development literature using artificial intelligence. And that was very much strongly led by Cornell University. And then we used a CGE model, a computer general equilibrium model, so an economic model, which applied hundreds of thousands of equations in a complex multi-country, multi-sector model to try and generate costs for how much money we need to achieve these goals. And even though this was a partnership of 3 organizations, we worked with 86 researchers from 23 countries and 53 organizations. So this was really a truly global effort. And the result is we know what to do now, and there should be no more excuses. We found that we need an additional $33 billion per year for the next 10 years, spent in 10 high impact areas to end hunger, double the incomes of smallholders, and protect our climate. We need an additional $14 billion a year from the donors and $19 billion from countries themselves to get to our total of 33 billion. And this is basically a doubling of current levels of spending. 2/3 needs to be on the farm. And that's why 2/3 of the additional spending needs to be on the farm. And that's why farmers' organizations are so critical here. 2/3 needs to be spent in Africa. I know this is not sexy. I know this is not trendy to talk about farmers and to talk about Africa, because we've been doing this for decades, but this is what the science and the economics says is needed. And this financing gap is tiny in comparison to the amounts of money we see, or the financing gaps we see in other sectors. If you look at the climate financing gaps, we're talking about trillions of dollars. If you look at the infrastructure financing gaps, we're talking about trillions of dollars. Today, the FT wrote that Apple, Alphabet, and Microsoft just made quarterly profits of $57 billion. That's $57 billion of profits after tax in 3 months. The scale of resources we need is tiny in comparison. And if we do this, we can remove 500 million people from hunger. We can double the incomes of 545 million small-scale producers and maintain greenhouse gas emissions in agriculture to the targets set in the Paris Climate Agreement. It would be criminal for us not to seize this opportunity. Thanks.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Karen. You guys have heard it from Karen, and I love the passion and of the delivery that you just, this is something that we can do and it's achievable. And we know what is going to make a difference. And we just need to get the political will, get things lined up and get it done. So thank you, Karen, for partnering in running this event and also in leading this conversation. And if you haven't checked out Series 2030, please do have a look at the interventions and really spend some time going through that, because it's really, really helpful as a base for understanding where to invest. So I'm going to now go to Mylene. Mylene Makbaha serves as the coordinator for the Land Rights and Young Farmers Agenda of the Asian Farmers Association for Sustainable Rural Development. Mylene, when we talk about building consensus, it has to start with farmers. I saw you nodding as Karen was talking. From your experience and from the farmers that you work with, what are some of the priority actions needed to lift farmers in Asia out of hunger and poverty and to double their incomes and productivity? Over to you.
Many thanks, Paul, for the question. And it's true, it's quite ironic that while family farmers are responsible for producing 80% of the world's food in terms of value, poverty continues to be widespread in rural areas, and many farmers live on less than $1 a day. The causes of hunger and poverty among farmers are numerous, and it would require as many solutions to address them. But let me just give a few priority actions that we think would support farmers in their role as the backbone of our food systems. First, we have to promote secure tenurial rights of small-scale family farmers over land and natural resources. Farmers who have rights over land can cope with and recover from stresses and shocks and maintain or enhance its capabilities and assets now and in the future, while not undermining the natural resource base. So we should invest in technical and institutional infrastructure for efficient and equitable land tenure administration in order to ensure property rights for both men and women. Second, we have to promote agroecological family farming systems and practices because agricultural intensification has dominated food production in recent years, but it has also become one of the major contributors to wicked environmental problems, from biodiversity loss to climate change. Family farmers already have the knowledge to support food production while restoring ecosystem services. And what we need now are actually policies and agricultural extension services that promote this traditional knowledge and practices and ensure that they are economically viable, not only for the family farmers, but also for the consumers as well. Third, we need to build and strengthen family farmers cooperatives and their enterprises to give our family farmers stronger involvement in value chains and increase their market power. So cooperatives provide opportunities for farmers to raise their incomes, and they are also democratic platforms, empowering people to own their own solutions. So policies and programs that render financial and technical support to cooperatives are needed to allow them to expand and diversify their business operations. Fourth, we need to promote gender equity in agriculture. By any indicator of human development, female power and resources are lowest in rural areas in developing countries. Although women substantially contribute to household well-being and agricultural production, men still largely control the land, the sale of crops and animals, and the use of the income. So we need policies and programs that empower women, providing them control over household and agricultural resources and increased access to financial services, skills development, information among markets, about markets, among others. Lastly, we need to address the graying of the agricultural sector. In Asia, we have a high proportion of young people, and yet the average age of farmers remain high. This is a result of a convergence of many factors that affect family farmers in general and young farmers in particular, such as the lack of access to knowledge, information, and education, the limited access to markets and financial services, and the limited involvement in dialogue. Thus, Paul, a new policy consensus should not just be one action, but be a set of actions that work synergistically, that addresses the aforementioned issues and also empower the key actors, the family farmers and their organizations. And I'm glad that Karen mentioned the need to highlight the role of family farming organizations, because the FOs can serve as the platform that provide the broad range of support that family farmers need to uplift themselves from poverty and also elevate their voices in policy making and decision making. So we need to recognize FOs as solution providers, accelerators of SDGs, and this recognition should come with tangible support. That is direct financing and investments to FOs through the establishment of grant facilities and funds. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mylene. And I love the fact, you were talking about that we need multiple actions working together in a synergistic way. And I think this is really critical. I think sometimes we fixate on one thing as a way of fixing something, and then we do them all in parts. But I think this idea of bringing things into a set of actions and doing that in a synergistic way, together building and working with the organizations that have the ability to also help implement. I think this is really helpful. Thank you. We're going to now move to Tamisha Lee, who is the president of the Jamaica Network of Rural Women Producers. Tamisha, I wonder if you can turn your camera on. You work directly with women smallholder farmers in Jamaica. And what are some of their concerns, and how do they need to be brought into the conversation around building a new policy consensus for action? Tamisha, are you?
Hi, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to address this very important session. Well, some of the main concerns affecting women smallholder farmers in Jamaica are lack of access to finance, lack of access to land, lack of market information system. In Jamaica, there is a slow process of gender mainstreaming in designing and implementing agricultural policies. There is the perception that farming is a predominantly male vocation. Women really need the assistance, and because there have been neglect that spans many generations, we find that while donor funder requires the application of the gender lens in projects, oftentimes it is found that women are invited to be part of these interviews to fulfill the registration requirements with no sense of sustainability. Many times we see that the farming activity for the women ends with the closure of these projects. If there is a structure and more inclusivity, I believe that could lead to more sustainable livelihoods for our women smallholder farmers. The way forward as it relates to policy consensus, I believe women should be included at the table at the initial stages of policy dialogue. Also, a bottom-up approach should be explored, as well as application of the gender lens in policies at conception. Agricultural policy should be budgeted for to include women and youth developmental concerns, explore non-traditional community-based financing mechanism for women and youth in agriculture. And lastly, lobby government for concessionary rate for land to women agricultural farmers. That is my contribution for now, Paul, and thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Tamisha, for joining, and thank you for this strong contribution. We're going to continue on, and it's great to see some comments into the conversation, into some comments in the chat, some questions. I see Karen, there's a question for you there in the Q&A. So please feel free to continue to add there. So we're now going to, we have Dr. Mohammed Ajuba Sharif, who serves as the Deputy Director General at the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry for Sierra Leone. I believe you have a couple of slides you would also like to share. We'd love to hear from you as a policymaker, some of the challenges you face in designing policies that would lift smallholder farmers out of hunger and poverty. What are the tools you need? Over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to be here, and I want to say thanks to the team, the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, for inviting me to contribute to this important Space Summit session. For us in agriculture and the food sector, our clients come first in terms of food. We all know that the food system or good food starts with the farmers, who are our clients, the smallholder farmers, the family farmers, the farmer-based organizations. And so therefore, what drives, what enhances their production, their distribution, their marketing outlets is agri-system data. The data is very, very, very key. And so therefore, put much premium on data. As we are here today, we are here for a new consensus, call for actions. And so therefore, we actually need a data platforms that will enhance production, that will be able to predict prices, promote marketing outlets for smallholder farmers. And therefore, the data has to be timely, and it has to be available, reliable data. And so therefore, we'll be able to collect the data, we'll be able to analyze the data, and also not to keep the data in the shelves, but to disseminate the data for the smallholders so that it will enhance the proper food systems. We all know that the agri-food system data, if we have a good data bank and knowledge management, that will really help us to enhance the food systems. So we are calling for action, and therefore we need to have a very good sound data systems. I will now share with you examples from Sierra Leone of a functional data systems. Next slide. Yes. For us in Sierra Leone, we have what is known as the National Strategy for Development of Statistics. That's the Statistics Sierra Leone. Actually, they have the statutory mandate, and we in the Ministry of Agriculture, we have the state of the sector mandate. So we all share the data, we collect the data, we conform to standards, you know, they pretend over our data collection, our presentations for the smallholder farmers. And also we are running what is known as an agricultural market information system. This system actually provides the basis for commodity concentration, commodity movement in the districts. The farmer will want to know the prices. It's a web-based platform. It's very easy to share. And then we also use community radios to air out prices, so that the farmers will know. It will enhance promotion of their sales. And then we also have what is known as the food security monitoring systems. This we run with the BFP and the Ministry of Agriculture. For the food security monitoring systems, we all know that the food security and nutrition security indicators are very, very, very dynamic. And so therefore this data system keeps monitoring after every 3 months. The output of such system is what we use in the card harmonization in the regional sector. So it will help us to track the indicators right up to the household food stock level. And also we have what is known as an eco-agris. It's actually shared with sales and the Ministry of Agriculture at the regional level. And we also have the country stats, which is the FAO and Ministry of Agriculture. These data systems are very much important for actually targeting, prioritizing, and reaching our smallholder farmers. We also have the harmonized framework, which is also housed by the Ministry of Agriculture and Sales. With all of these data systems, it helps us to track, to actually do what is known as proper resource mapping. So for me today, this is the summit for the people. I want to emphasize here that we must emphasize a very good sound data systems if we are calling for new consensus to actually promote the smallholder farmers' investments, production, and enhance a very good systems. However, there are some challenges that I want to share. Yes, the challenges has to do with investments. I mean, it's very unpredictable, even on the part of our governments and that of our donors. When once a project life cycle is about 1 year, we invest in the data collection, data analysis, and when the project phases out, that is the end of that data system. This is what is actually operating in most developing countries. For example, in Sierra Leone, we have what is known as the Food and Nutrition Security Early Warning System. Yes, we have the Irish Aid and the FAO funding that one for 2 years. After that, government takes over. And then the government allocation will not allow us to have an early warning, rather we'll have it as a late warning because of the allocation procedures. So that's the kind of unpredictability of governments, of investments in the data collection. Even at the design stage of projects, much investment is put on direct beneficiaries, what goes in terms of fertilizer, seeds, and machineries. Very little amount of money goes for data collection, data monitoring. And then if you actually want to measure the performance, the beneficiary perception and everything, it is data. That data is evidence-based. This is where investment is very, very, very low. And also, it's the timely investment in food security data and statistics is really, I mean, maybe the data are obsolete. You want a timely data, you don't get the data. The time series data will not be available. There's also limited capacity, even at data collection, the analysis and knowledge management. This is both technological infrastructure. This is actually what is disturbing our data management in most of the developing countries. The appropriate end users and farmer-friendly feedback mechanism is also very, very important, but it's a challenge. I mean, if you collect the data, you analyze data for the farmers, and if they don't get it, they don't receive it, they want to make use of it, the dissemination of that data is critical. And also, you want a new data. How are you going to access the data? It's very important. Are you going to do it by digital methods, or is it going to be by television? Is it going to be by leaflets, etc.? That's a problem. Accessibility is a problem. So the last challenge now actually is we all know that we have policies, environments that have to do with our flagship programs. Most of these data collecting systems and data systems are not properly aligned with our flagship programs. So there are a lot of inconsistencies, policy inconsistencies as we progress. May I conclude by making a few recommendations? Yes. For us, my recommendations are purely about the investment in agri-food data system by governments and donors. Yes, we have to pay attention, and then we have to take a new action today that as we are designing projects for the smallholder farmers, for the family farmers, for the indigenous people, let us put good money, let us invest into the data systems. And also, let us improve on the coordination of data. There are various data collectors at our family levels, at our ministry levels, you know, but if those data are not connected, it will not yield the desired results. So therefore, coordination is also very important, both at national and international levels, if we actually want to achieve our targets. And then alignment, of course, is important. We need to align when we are designing projects, let us align it both at the regional, the national, international, looking at our poor farmers, where we are coming from. So I want to recommend that the governments and donors, we have to do proper alignment. I thank you very much, and over.
Thank you so much. And thank you for this real reminder of the importance of data. And I think this consensus, you know, I go back to what Mylene said about this package of interventions and how they fit together, and data is really critical for us to be able to really be able to measure and make informed decisions and investments. We're going to continue the conversation. I'm going to bring in Dr. Johan Swinnen, who has become the Director General of the International Food Policy Research Centre, known as IFPRI, in January 2020, and Global Director of Systems Transformation at the CGIAR in May 2021. And so as a leader in the CGIAR system, what's the role that research plays in sustainably doubling smallholder livelihoods and productivity? And how can the new One CGIAR best build on and surpass past success in the run up to 2030 and beyond? Over to you.
Thanks very much, Paul. The points I'm going to make is actually quite aligned with some of the points which has been mentioned already, that we cannot just look at one particular issue, for example, just on yields or something, but we have to look at it from a systemic perspective and look at a number of factors, a number of aspects of the whole system, and we need to address all of these. The research on smallholders and fishermen, I suppose, as well, should be at the core of what we do as a global research community. If for any group in society we are addressing a public good, it's probably for them. We know that this research is actually highly profitable from a social perspective. The benefit cost ratios vary between 7 and 30, depending on the different studies, but there is a huge return on investment. As Karen already explained very well, I think the research, we need more of that to go towards the zero hunger objective, towards doubling productivity, etc. But it's not just a matter of using more dollars from public expenditures, but actually also from restructuring some of the public expenditures that currently exist. There is very interesting work being done by IFPRI and the World Bank on how, if we repurpose some of the public expenditures that are going to agriculture right now, and we invest more in, for example, research and development, only even a part of that, that has major implications for productivity, for diets, and also for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. What's important here, I think, is that the research should really use a systems approach. Okay, systems approach actually in 3 ways. One is in what we target. Okay, so we're just not targeting yields growth, but we're targeting poverty, resilience, sustainability, poverty reduction, obviously, but also improved nutrition. What is really paradoxical is that the people who produce most of our food are also often the most hungry or the most malnourished. The second reason why we need a systems perspective is we need to look both at technology development, at changes in the management of the farms, etc., in a very broad sense, and at changes in the policy environment, the macro environment, as has been mentioned by several people already. And I think also in terms of the implementation, how do you bring research from research in the lab, on the field, or behind our computer screen to actually having an impact for smallholders? And that we need to work with partners, often at the local level, and to scale our findings to make a real impact. The innovations that are needed are many. Okay, I mean, many people have referred to this already. I think you can all come up with that: access to markets for output, access to better inputs, to credit, insurance mechanism, risk mitigating mechanisms, and particularly in the climate change world. But we need to do this in a 21st century perspective. That means climate change has to be at the core of what we do. Modernizing value chains are happening everywhere, not just in middle-income countries, but also in poor countries. We need a demand-driven perspective. Okay, start from the consumption side, work our way back, and see how we can integrate smaller, so we can upgrade them into a higher value segment of the world food system, and we need an overall system perspective, as I already explained. And so this includes technological innovations, better inputs, better seeds, etc., and a variety of management improvements, but also institutional innovations and policy reforms. There's lots of evidence actually in history that the combination of these things can have a really big impact on smallholders. Probably the most dramatic example is what happened in China in the 1980s and the 1990s after major, very important policy reforms took place around 1980, and this has triggered a tremendous growth of China in general, but starting in the agricultural sector, and it's driven by smallholder-based growth. I mean, China is still a smallholder economy when you look at it. So it is possible, and of course, there's numerous other examples in the rest of the world. Also from COVID-19, I think we can draw some lessons. The smallholder agriculture has been much more resilient than we had predicted early on. And so there's a number of reasons for that. And a lot of the poverty growth has actually been among the urban poor and the industrial people working in industry and other and service sectors rather than in agriculture. There's also been a massive investment and creativity in the food value chains as a whole in terms of institutional innovations, technological innovation, growth of digital. And this is not only true for multinationals, for example, it's also true for domestic value chains in developing countries, and even for a number of farmer cooperatives, for example, have taken initiatives on this. So these are hopeful signs that things can work. So what I mentioned is true for research in general. My own organization, the IFPRI and the CGIAR, and more broadly, is at a major restructuring to address these challenges. And so the new One CGIAR research strategy is really taking the system approach at its heart, at the core of what we're doing. We are organizing ourselves in 3 major research areas. One looking at technological innovations, genetic innovations, other ones on rethinking and innovation management systems and other systems at the farm and fishery level. And then the third group is rethinking policy systems, macroeconomic systems. And so with that, and we're planning to work, really scheduled to work with partners in developing countries to make change and make impact at scale possible, and really it's a core element. So why don't I stop there, and I'm happy to address any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Jo, for your contribution. And I think it's really critical to bring in some of these questions around research and some of the work that's already happening and how that fits into this kind of framework and this consensus. And I think it's really going to be critical as we think through the rapid change that needs to happen, how research plays a role and science plays a role in really driving and informing. So we're going to continue the conversation. Time is continuing to move. But before I bring in Dr. Lawrence Haddad, I'm going to just introduce that we have a Menti, which is a link that's going to drop into the chat, and we're wanting to create a bit of a word cloud. As you've been hearing from the different speakers, I'd love you to also put what would some of the priorities be for a new consensus on smallholder farmers. We want to hear from you. We want to hear what your views are. And there's going to be, if you look in that chat, just to list your priorities, put down 1 or 2. Let's see what emerges from the conversation of people there. And we'll make sure that we share that later through social media and in some follow-up with this conversation. But this is the start of a conversation. And so we want to really make sure that we're creating ways to hear from you. So I'm now going to invite Dr. Lawrence Haddad, who is the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition since 2020. He's also the chair of Action Track 1 of the Food System Summit, focused around ensuring access to safe and nutritious food for all, and also the co-convener of the Standing Together for Nutrition. So leading Action Track 1, there's been an emerging idea of a zero hunger coalition. Could you say a little bit about what prompted this idea, and how do you see this kind of coalition contributing to building a new consensus for smallholders? Over to you, Lawrence.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me. So Action Track 1 is all about ensuring access to safe and nutritious food for all. And there are 3 focal points, centers of gravity within that action track. The first is zero hunger. Second is healthy diets. And the third is food safety. And of course, they're all deeply connected. Just as we were beginning in September of last year, well, a month later, the SERES 2030 report landed. And I was so happy because here was a science-based roadmap that would actually get us to under 200 million people that are hungry by 2030 if we doubled public investment. So we put out a call in, I think, November for ideas in Action Track 1 area from around the world. We've got over 200 ideas in the so-called wave 1 of ideas, which came to us by January. And while I was very happy with the vibrancy and creativeness and certainly the diversity of geographic locations and the sources of where the ideas came from, I was quite disappointed with the number of solutions that were focusing on hunger reduction. At the same time, we had launched the idea of a private sector pledge, because while $33 billion is really not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things, a lot of governments, of course, very cash strapped when it comes to finding funds for things like this because of the demands of COVID-19. So we approached the private sector, and initially it was in the form of a contribution of profits. Even it was $1 and 500, which seems tiny to me, but we know big businesses don't like to give up any money in a form of anything that's perceived to be a tax. We flirted with the idea of CSR, because big businesses spend $15 billion a year on CSR, corporate social responsibility, but they said we're moving away from corporate social responsibility. So as of December, as of January, I was feeling fairly depressed about Action Track 1's ability to mobilize people to reduce hunger, because it seemed to me that hunger was a kind of a boring, it was perceived to be a boring 20th century thing that we've already figured out what to do, and we want to do much more really exciting, trendy stuff around regenerative agriculture and reducing food loss, food waste, and stuff like that. And that's really important. I'm not saying it's not, but that on its own is not going to end hunger. There needs to be a focused effort to reduce hunger. So in the second round of ideas that we called for, because we had a second call, which and a bunch of those landed in May of this year, we very clearly said we want ideas that link to the SERES 2030 idea. So colleagues from University of Pretoria, One Acre Fund, a whole bunch of the CG was involved, IFPRI was involved. We got a lot of ideas on hunger reduction in the SERES 2030 area. We put them all together. So we felt that we had a really nice set of if you like, illuminated, context-specific ways of bringing the SERES 2030 recommendations into sharp relief, into a context-specific setting. And then on the private sector side, we refined the pledge, working with Karen, who sort of joined us in, I think, February, March. We refined the private sector pledge to be a pledge which is part of the coalition, to be a pledge to align what you're doing, businesses, with these 10 investment areas in these 50 priority countries. And that has now really taken off. And we've got 15 companies saying definitely, and another 20 or 30 saying maybe. And I think we'll get up to 100 companies. We'll get up to 100 companies by the summit. We also brought in wasting. We were doing, there was a group on hunger reduction also said, look, we need to do more on child wasting, which is one manifestation of hunger and malnutrition in children. We'd felt that the global action plan that UNICEF and WFP had started was good, but WFP and UNICEF is not the sum total of the collective and collaborative efforts to reduce wasting. And we could do more to create an enabling environment around what they were doing. So we brought that in. And so we now have a coalition of 21 countries and counting, 15 companies and counting, and 21 civil society organizations and counting. What is the coalition going to do? It's going to do three things. It's going to advocate for hunger reduction more forcefully and more clearly and more strategically. I feel like hunger reduction as a goal has kind of lost its way. I think people, including myself, felt like we've kind of hunger is well on its way to being reduced steadily. And it was until about 2015, 2016, when the numbers began to increase. And then we've seen this supercharging in the last year. Well, it's not supercharging, that sounds way too positive. But anyway, a massive increase in hunger numbers of 118 million people. It's going to do three things. It's going to advocate, it's going to help align resources. So align resources of governments and businesses around these 10 SERES areas. And there'll be some variations, of course. And the third thing it's going to do is add resources. We're going to try to get additional resources to focus on these 10 areas. So advocate, align, and add. We have work to do on the coalition. We need to build out the fragile states part. It's a bit underdeveloped. We need to make a stronger link into nutritious foods. There are ways to reduce hunger that can focus on nutritious foods more, so we need to do that. But we're also building a coalition around healthy diets, and I think that'll be a nice complement to the Zero Hunger one, and the healthy diets one will have to take into account where the Zero Hunger one is going. So Paul, back to you.
Thank you, Lawrence, and it's exciting to see this coming together. And I think this package of interventions, and I think this reimagining, definitely, I think, Lawrence, is something that we need to gather around. And I think this conversation can be a part of that. It's also great to see in the chat just a number of people, somebody reaching out from Action Track 4 to start seeing this is what the pre-summit's about, to see the coming together, the coalescing around these ideas as we build our ambitions towards September. And so we're very tight on time. We have some questions we wanted to share with the panel, but due to time, we've been told we can't go over. And so I'm going to paste the questions into the chat. We're also going to ask people to, we will send something as a follow-up with those questions, and we would love feedback because it seems like there's a lot here. I'm going to ask Karen just to give me, and I'm going to give you 1 minute before I do the final sum, but just 1 minute of reflections just on what you've heard, just some rapid fire. What have you heard as the co-convener of this conversation?
Thanks, Paul. I think I want to start by just saying how thrilled I am that, Lawrence, you're here, because I think the energy that you've brought to the UN Food Systems Summit around the issue of hunger, you've been like our biggest champion. So I'm thrilled that you're here at this session. And I'm thrilled that I sometimes feel like you're more excited about the SERES 2030 results and roadmap than I am. So I'm so glad to have a partner here. But for me, what Lawrence is trying to do in the Zero Hunger Coalition through the UN Food Systems Summit is trying to give us this broad coalition of all the actors who need to do more. And you're right, who need to do better, not just more, to achieve our targets. And so I think this Zero Hunger Coalition brings together the member states that we need to do those three things: advocate, align, and add resources. It brings together the private sector. So I mentioned in the chat, there was a question about private sector investment, and I've been working closely with Lawrence to say, we're not going to be able to double public spending, especially ODA money, because it's shrinking. We need the private sector to step up. We need to drive more private sector investment into our 10 areas and into our priority countries. And so this coalition brings a space where the private sector plays their role in this pledge. And then this group, or this new consensus, brings the voice of our international organizations, our civil society organizations, our farmers organizations, to say we back this new consensus and we agree that this is what's going to need to be done. And we may not necessarily work with the private sector, but we'll certainly work in a big coalition with them and drive an agenda forward that puts those advocacy needs at the center. So just to say, yeah, those are my reflections. I'm glad that we're bringing this all together here, that we've got the Zero Hunger Coalition, this new consensus, the private sector pledge. I think it's going to help us drive that transformative agenda we need to get to zero hunger and to strengthen smallholder production systems by 2030. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Karen. So today was all about beginning the conversation. And over the next few weeks, months, we're going to be collaborating. We're going to be looking and leaning in and asking each of the organizations that have been a part of this, but also others to join. I think as Lawrence says, Action Track 3, 4, and 5 are also working on this alongside 1. And so, you know, this is something that connects to all of us. And I think we really need to gather around. And so I really appreciate the contributions from everyone here on the call, the energy that you've brought, the insight that you've brought, and those contributions. And we will be packaging this up, listening to the points that you had, and also then trying to invite more conversation. We hope that we can lead to a call to action that civil society organizations, farmer organizations, governments, multilaterals can sign on to, so that we can really get back on track to achieving our ambitious goals around 2030. So I want to thank our partners for this: CGIAR, FAO, GAFSP, Global Citizen, the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data, World Vision International, who have all helped shape this idea thus far, and who look forward to working with you and others to build on today's session in an engaging and wide, diverse conversation that's inclusive of a broad set of stakeholders. Thank you everyone for joining today. Please continue to engage and share your ideas as we build this new consensus. Thank you to the colleagues that have supported us on this webinar from the SDG2 Hub, and please spread the word that we really need to lean into this important role, new consensus around smallholder farmers. So thank you. I know the closing session for the pre-summit is going to be happening shortly, so please make sure you dial in and be a part of that and hear those commitments and that ambition as we go towards September. Thank you, everyone.